Hello and welcome to PFI Talks, brought to you by Prague Finance Institute, an affiliate of the leading Czech economics research center Sergej EI. My name is Leoš Rousek. I'm the head of communications at PPF Group and also the host of this podcast. It is my pleasure to welcome Kyla Scanlon, an economic commentator, writer, and educator. Well, this is all good and well, I dare to say, but Kyla is hardly a typical economic commentator, writer, and educator. She's a truly digitally savvy entrepreneur. From having zero social media following about 3 years ago, she has gone to over 650,000 followers across Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and good old email. She leverages her reach to make economic issues graspable to large lay and expert audiences, also targeting young audience, Z generation, or Generation Z, whatever you want to call it. Kyla also has her own podcast and recently published her own book, In This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work. Hello, Kyla.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for that very kind intro.
Well, you do really strive to explain basic economic principles in whatever you do. But in your new book, if you can show it to us, if you have a copy.
I don't have a copy on my desk, but I have this print of what the cover is. So.
Oh, this is great. This is great.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't made it here yet. I mean, cover. It's only coming. So you talk about the difference between journalism, economic journalism, and the economic reality, to put it this way, and me as a former business journalist, it's kind of interesting what you say that, headlines are sort of worded or crafted to make people sort of a little anxious, maybe worried. Maybe, it's all clickbaity culture today. So your aim seemed to be helping people to understand what's happening without making them anxious. But how do you actually do that? I mean, what actually made you trying to and aspire to do that?
Yeah. So it wasn't like when I started off, it wasn't like, oh, I need to, make sure that people aren't freaking out about economics. It was more, I just wanted to provide people the tools that they need to understand the economy. So the book is meant to be kind of like this toolbox that people can pull from to get access around information around inflation, around the labor market, around the Federal Reserve, GDP. And so that's kind of the foundational knowledge aspect. And then in terms of media headlines, it is the business model. Like, things can be sensationalized. Like, if you have a negative word in the headline of an article, the click-through rate increases by 2.3%. But if you have a positive word, it decreases by 1.9%. And so part of the goal with the book, too, is to remain as objective as possible. Toward the end, I give policy decisions, which probably aren't that objective. They do lean a certain way. They're not super conservative. They're more like using government money to make a difference in people's lives. But yeah, like things are really noisy right now. And the book is meant to simplify that noise and hopefully be a signal for people to pull whatever they need from it.
You publishing this book, and it's a great undertaking, and on diagrams. Did you actually do the drawings yourself? Did you?
Yeah, people ask me that a lot. I do everything myself across all of my channels. I'm a team of one person. So I did there's 60 illustrations in the book. I did all of those. So I studied economics in school and worked in finance once I graduated. And like the way I understood everything was through drawings. And, there's two angles to including the illustrations in the book. The first one is that's how I learned. I think it's really important to have drawings, to have pictures, to have visuals, because we can read all the words that we want, but sometimes having an image there makes things much more anchored for us. The other thing, it's a little bit silly, but I really think economics needs more art made about it. Like, it needs more beauty within
Did you say art?
Yeah, ART, art. I think that like the economy is structurally so phenomenal. Like, it's so cool how it works. Like, opportunity cost, for example, or supply and demand, money flows. Like, money itself is like this really fascinating concept. And so I really wanted to make art around the economy. And that's kind of what the illustrations are. They're, crude drawings, but they're art around the economy.
When I was actually looking at it, because I've seen parts of the, illustration for the book. And then I read somewhere in one of your blog posts or newsletters, again, I wasn't really differentiating among them. I mean, you started off as an avid reader. Usually, at least you wrote it about yourself, that you were sort of frequenting your local library, grabbing tons of books every week, bringing them back. And then you also said that when you were like, and correct me, like 10 or 12, you did your first book then, and it had drawings at that time. So what was it? Tell us more about it. And your library era.
Yeah, in my library era. I was 8 years old, and like the library was my favorite place in the world. We went every week, which I'm so grateful to my mom for making that trip. And it was like this windowless room. I wrote about it in the newsletter, but it was this like small, dingy, windowless room. But to me, it was the most magical place. And I really loved reading. And one day, I'd get about 10 books and I'd push them across the desk to the librarian, and I'd do it every week. And we had this like friendship where she would like smile at me and I would just stare back at her because I was 8 and didn't know how to communicate. And one day she was like, you could write a book yourself. And that just blew my mind because that was all I wanted to do, was like do what these authors who were so inspiring to me had done. And so I wrote this book called The Little Penguin. That was about a penguin and a seal and their fight against a walrus, and had, illustrations in it. And then I just kept on writing books up until I was about 11, I think was my last book. Because then it became, I did more homework than I did writing, unfortunately. But then, into college, I had this blog called Scanlon on Stocks where I talked about my options trading. And so writing has always been a really big part of my life.
Mhm.
And then, the book itself, this one is more, it's like not, it's not, it's not a writing style book. Like it's something that's pretty straightforward. There's a ton of flowery language because I'm trying to explain concepts, not like confuse people more. But yeah, writing has always been the way that I've learned, and especially with drawings. And so I tried to incorporate both of those things into this upcoming book that's coming out.
I'd like to actually stop here a little, because I'm glad you're saying all that, because it seems like everybody now knows you because you are a big personality on various different social media platforms. You do what you do. You are educating. I know you don't like, be called and labeled influencer, and I'm saying no one should ever actually say that, and I will never repeat that again, because what you are really doing, you're using modern digital tools to leveraging what's actually foundationally written. So what I'm actually driving at is my question. I mean, do you think you could be able doing what you do in this digital era without having a sound foundation in reading and writing?
Not what I specifically do. I don't think so. So I do like YouTube, I do a newsletter, I do a podcast, I do daily short form videos. And I think you can kind of get away with like dancing videos on social media without having a strong foundation in writing and reading potentially. But for me, like the way that I write about the economy is because I read about how people wrote about other people. Like I tried to write through a very human-centric lens. And so I don't think I could write the way that I do or have the viewpoint that I do if I hadn't read and written so much when I was younger. And I thank you for the comments about not being an influencer, because I think you're right that like a lot of people push back against social media and they're like, it's so bad, like just, nobody should ever use it, like it's gonna rot our brains from the inside out. But it's where people are. And so like that's how I think about my content, is that you can talk about the economy to other economists all day long, but you really kind of got to be where they are. And I consider myself a consolidator more than anything. There's researchers out there who are way smarter than I will ever be. And all I do is like package their information down so that the average person can understand it and apply it to their lives. So that's what I try to do, is like be not a middleman per se, but kind of someone in between, the economists who are talking about the economy, and then the everyday person who needs to understand the economy in order to live within the economy, but isn't going to sit down and read a research paper.
So it's kind of like humanizing intricately difficult, or what seem difficult economic concepts.
Yeah, that's what I try to do.
So when you actually do those short videos, let's stop here because it's really interesting it would be really interesting, at least for me, and I hope for our listeners and viewers to see how you actually really do it. So do you write a script for those, or is it sort of like, obviously, because quite often you react what's actually going on, what's happening, so it's actually pretty, because you do it every day. Do you prepare, do you write a script, or do you just go?
So I used to. So I started this about 2.5 years ago, doing videos. And my first video took me about 6 hours. And it's a 30-second video, and it took me 6 hours between writing the script and editing. But now I have it down to sort of a science because I've done one almost every day for the past 2.5 years. So that's like, over 600 videos. And I don't use a script right now. I just sort of gather links and like bullet points of what I want to talk about, and then kind of attach whatever I want to say on top of it. So no scripting at the moment for most of the videos. Sometimes I'll sit down and write a script if I'm doing a piece for Bloomberg Opinion or another financial outlet. There's usually a need for a script so they can like fact check it and stuff, which is totally understandable. But for my daily videos, there's no script in place right now.
Mm-hmm. So, and when do you find time to actually do the newsletter, to write the newsletter or write the commentaries for Bloomberg Opinion?
Yeah. So the videos don't take that long. They take about, an hour and a half a day. And so the rest of the time, right now, it's like a lot of book marketing because the book comes out on the 28th. So in 5 days as of time of recording. And right now, it's a lot of like just book stuff. And then for the past year, it's just been a lot of book stuff. And so that was kind of the bulk of my day. And then I travel a lot for work. So I go to various engagements and speak. I also teach, so I, talk at Harvard, MIT, Berkeley. Have had the opportunity to do that stuff. So I travel. I'm gone about once a week right now to various cities, and then within the Bloomberg Opinion and other, like I'm a co-host of the podcast for Wealth Simple, which is an asset manager up in Canada. I work a little bit with the Academy of Arts and Sciences. I work with other companies as well, like We the Investors, and that just kind of like patches itself throughout the day. I'm trying a new style of work where I wake up very early in the morning.
What time?
And I'll 3
3.
a.m.
That's not
Yeah.
early. That's not. You wake up in the middle of the night.
Yeah. But what I'm testing is that, like, because I have the flexibility because I set my own schedule and like own my own business, which I'm so grateful to do, and I'm a contractor. But I'm testing to see if like working throughout the morning and then like having free time in the afternoon and then working again in the evening is good for me. So yeah, I'm still like figuring out the work style
So
specifically,
what
but
time
that's
do
how
you
I
go to
sort of.
bed? I have to ask you that.
Yeah, I don't right now. I'm really trying to fix my sleep schedule because I don't sleep a whole lot right now. Yeah.
Mm,
So I go to bed pretty late. Not
mm.
late, but like, late for me. Yeah. It's not
When
healthy. It's
mm,
not something I want to encourage.
let's actually let's put it out there that this is
Yeah,
not what anyone should sort of really
you
follow
should
long
sleep.
term. You should
Yeah,
really sleep.
you really should.
Um, when you mentioned that you actually teach at like MIT and Harvard, are they lectures or do you have your own course? And if you do,
Oh,
what is the course?
yeah, it's like a speaking engagement. So no
Speaking.
courses yet. Hopefully maybe one day that'd be super cool, but I don't have a PhD in the field, so we'll see if that ends up working out. But yeah, like I'll go and give a talk. Like I've talked at MIT um for the past 2 years now, I think, once a semester. And then like I'll go to Harvard, and I talked at Berkeley the past 2 years. And basically it's just what most academic institutions kind of want is somebody to come in and be like, here's how all the theory that you're learning applies to current events.
Mhm.
And that's what I do, is I apply economic theory to current events. And I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity to do that for the students and their professors.
Well, let's go back to the book that's coming out in 5 days as of today's recording. In one of the chapters, you talk about, the economics of your grandma's banana bread.
Yeah.
Is it somehow linked to the name of your company? Because your company is called Bread. So is it? And the other, can you, how would you come up with these ideas for your book? And are there others? Can you give us more examples?
No, it's not linked to bread. That'd be good though. I should say it is. Bread is more, that's the company name, and it's just money. It's another term for money.
Money buys bread.
Yeah. And like before I got the book offer, I was going to build software for financial education. And so Bread was going to be the name of that platform. So that is like a work in progress still, but that's where the name Bread comes from. It's another term for money and was going to be the name of a financial platform. But there are a lot of examples throughout the book, kind of like that. Like I explained GDP through the lens of a gingerbread person economy and like these giant gingerbread men and how they interact with one another. And then banana bread explains like supply chains, supply and demand. There's a couple of other examples like that. The Economic Kingdom is the first chapter of the book, and that was my attempt at sort of creating interconnectivity between various economic castles. So there's like the monetary policy castle and the fiscal policy castle, the inflation castle, the labor market castle. And for me, it's very useful to see how all of the different economic components lay out and intertwine with one another. And that was the goal of that example specifically.
It's actually interesting because one of my questions was about how do you actually get ideas on what you should focus on in your short videos or the chapters of this book. And obviously, because you do these speaking engagements, I suppose you have Q&A sessions after your presentation, I suppose. So that's probably where you actually maybe test your ideas, what to actually do the videos for. And if I'm talking about what specific economic concepts you should focus on a given day.
No, it's my comments. So I'm lucky enough to post videos across a couple social media platforms, and we'll get hundreds of comments every single day. And that's where I learned what to talk about, is because people will tell me what they're curious about and what they want to know. That's how I kind of come to the conclusions of how to describe things. I test pretty much all of my ideas on my very kind audience who puts up with a lot of my stuff. And that's how the book kind of came to fruition, was me like throwing different ideas out there, seeing what stuck, seeing if I was explaining things the right way. That's the usefulness of social media, is the reactionary aspect of it. Like people will tell you what they're thinking, even if it's the meanest thing you've ever heard. And that's how I got a lot of the ideas, was through just testing ideas on them.
So how much time a day do you spend on actually reading the comments? Because I mean, it's a large following you have, and I'm.
I skim, so I try not to read too deeply. But usually there will be like some comment will get a lot of likes, and so I'll pay attention to that one and be like, okay, people are resonating with that. Like, what's going on? And that's kind of what I end up paying attention to the most. I'll take breaks from reading the comments, actually, just because sometimes it can feel not so good to have some of that feedback, which is more a personal problem than anything. But yeah, so I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I do spend enough time that I can glean what's happening. Like this term, the vibe session that I coined back in July of 2022, was, the word itself did not come from the comments, but like the idea, this disconnect between economic data and consumer sentiment came from what I was seeing in my comment section. Like I was talking about how strong GDP was, and people were like, but I feel terrible. So that's more what happens, is they are a very good indicator for, what's happening.
A little bit of a disclaimer. Vibe session, I actually borrowed that term from you as well, but I have to tell you a little bit of a sort of a historical background to that. For me, the first person ever who actually coined that from like the economic and political science or political economy science perspective, who coined that phrase but used different words, is a late Czech president Václav Havel. And he did it about, I don't know, it's probably now 15 years or so. and he actually called it that the society is in blue mood. He called it like bad mood. Anyway, so but going back to this, it's these these words that you use for describing it, and then the context you put in, it's actually very useful because it does really bring bring the message of sometimes a very lofty concept into, it actually does have a lot of relevance for our lives. And I suppose that's really your goal to sort of like bring it home to the young audience. So is it fair to say that you're, I mean, if we were to sum up what you do in, let's say, one semi-short sentence, that I strive to do, Kyla Scanlon, strive to do and promote financial and economic literacy.
Yeah, that's what I do.
That's what you do. So, and we talked about how you choose your topics, that you actually read the comments, you get the ideas. But do you prioritize any topics or concepts that you want to describe? I mean, or do you see some of them that you need to go back to them to drive the message home?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the Czech president saying blue mood, that's very similar to like vibes are not a new concept. Like Keynes came up with animal spirits, George Soros came up with reflexivity. It's all in that same sort of boat. And that's kind of a concept that I go back to quite a bit, is like, why do people feel the way that they do? The theory with my work is that like people are the economy, and like we should probably pay attention to what they're saying and like why they're feeling the way that they do. And so I end up revisiting that quite a bit, mostly because there's just such a huge disconnect in the US between like data and sentiment. Like the US is mostly doing relatively fine. We have structural affordability problems, polarization, like all of this stuff that does impact sentiment, but like economic metrics wise, we're okay. So I revisit that quite a bit. And then I do revisit inflation quite a bit. I've had a hard time explaining that just because it is so complex and it's so personal too. Like that's the hard part about the economy at large.
What makes it so difficult to explain or get the message across?
It's personal. And so everybody, everybody has a different inflation rate, depending on what you buy, right?
Yeah.
And like where you're living. Like your rent could have gone up by like 20%, or it could be going down if you live in Austin, Texas. And so it's kind of like you're telling people what's happening on a national scale, but people are like, but for me, that's not true. But like so on a national scale, it is.
What you're actually saying, that in the US, there should be like upwards of 300 million, consumer baskets.
Yeah, technically, I guess. But I don't know. It's like it's more of a media literacy problem too. It's like people want things to be very specific to and I'm generalizing, but like people really like when things are very specific to their personal situation, and that's just not the case with the economy sometimes. So, yeah.
So, if you were to like pick three, what would be the biggest takeaways or the most important takeaways readers should take from your upcoming book?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one is, and I'm sure you might run into this too, it's like when you tell people that you work in finance or economics, they're like, I hate both of those things. And so I think one of the goals with the book is to show people that they're a part of the economy, whether they like it or not. And in order to be a part of something, you kind of have to understand at least somewhat of how it works. And so I'm hoping that the book is a toolbox for people to understand what inflation, labor market, GDP, Federal Reserve, what all of those things are. And hopefully with that knowledge, they can make better decisions about maybe buying a house or certain investments, maybe a certain job that they're going to take on. And that's like one of the main goals. The second is that people are the economy. So it's very similar to the first one in the sense that like you kind of have to know what's happening. But then I think also just sort of pointing to the more humanistic aspect of the economy is important. A lot of researchers already do this. It's like very, very useful. Stephanie Sancheva, Isabella Weber do a really great job at talking about how certain decisions impact the consumer. But I think that's like one thing I would love for people to take away is that like they are a part of this really big system, and like what how they feel matters and like all of that more woo-woo stuff. It's super important to process and work through. And then the final thing is that it's not it's not that complicated. Like yes, certain measurements are fuzzy and weird and hairy and confusing, but like the economy itself is complicated because we're complicated as humans. Like humans are really hard to measure, but it is all understandable. So all of the points are very similar to one another, but I think like having the knowledge that you're a part of the system and understanding the system, knowing that the system is comprised of people, and then sort of trusting in yourself to be a part of that system is what I would want people to take away from it.
Let's talk about a little bit of a, like target audience segmentation. Do you have to somehow alter or change your videos or your, educational sort of pitches given, by platform, that you do a different type of style of a video for TikTok or something different for Instagram or Twitter?
I do all the same stuff. It would probably be smarter if I did it the way that you've just described. But I think for me, like I kind of talk at a level that is not super basic. You have to have a foundational knowledge to understand most of what I'm saying, I think. And so it kind of applies to most people. I definitely get really into the weeds on my newsletter. Like on my TikTok, I just sort of talk about the news, but in my newsletter, I'm throwing around poems and philosophy and telling stories that I don't normally do in the short form videos. And that also applies to the YouTube too. I get a little bit deeper because I have more time to
Mhm.
talk. And if I have more time, I'm probably going to throw a poem in there. So that's probably the main difference is I really love multidisciplinary, especially with regards to economics. Like I think economics has so much to learn from philosophy. It's like, they're all sort of the same thing. Economics is the philosophy of
Economics
money,
art,
some say.
economics philosophy. Oh,
Yeah, so that would probably be how I segment the content is those who read the newsletter get up probably a little bit more poetry than they signed up for.
so when I was preparing, as we discussed it, I mean, you still do a little bit of impersonation of the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. Uh, Before I ask you, and I'm asking you now, I mean, that if you can show us what you do with it, but I mean, is that type of audio more for like a TikTok audience or Twitter or not?
Yeah, so I started those skits. I mean, how I started was I did skits about the economy and finance. So like all of my videos were not me talking into the screen. It was like a skit that I had put together, which was very scripted. And then I started doing skits about the Federal Reserve, which was really, really fun. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about art, is that like I think finance needs to be a little bit more fun sometimes, not like GameStop fun, but like fun in the terms of entertainment. And so yeah, like the whole point of the skits was to turn this very important meeting, into something that people would hopefully pay attention to. And it worked. I don't know if I'll continue doing the skits. I don't know if it's the right environment for them, but they were really fun when I did them. Yeah.
Because in one of the interviews, I know you've done even a few interviews with like Federal Reserve board members, but you do say one good thing that actually the toolkit or toolbox of Federal Reserve is actually pretty limited. You know, hiking
Yeah.
rates or cutting rates, or maybe buying some securities or selling them or whatever. But they have U.S. Fed newspeak or speak, the way they talk. So can you show us how they talk?
Mm. Oh man. Let's see if I can. So I have these glasses so these are the glasses that I normally wear when I pretend to to be Jerome Powell. And then I'll put on this like blazer as well. But I mean, really, like the way that they talk is like we're uncertain about the path that we're going to take. Um, we're going to continue to shrink our balance sheet, but we're not making a decision on rate cuts at this time. Yeah, so it's just like language like that. Like there's always a reference to uncertainty. There's always a reference to data driven. to remaining steadfast in their goals to fight inflation. What's funny about the Fed meetings is that they publish a statement every time that they have a meeting, and people will say like what parts of it have changed. And like they'll be like just one line has changed sometimes. So they usually say the exact same things most of the time. And it is in that Fed speak language that you were talking about. And, when I make these videos, I try to break down that language as much as possible, because it is a little bit complicated to understand if you're not always listening to the Federal Reserve. But there's also, they want to make it complicated because part of their deal is that they have to be secretive and not let people know exactly what they're going to do and how they're going to do it and why they're going to do it. So yeah, that was life happened. This is deep, like it's not what we're talking about right now, but like life happens in segments to a certain extent. Like you move on from one project to another, and I do think the skits are not happening anymore, but I think helps people really understand what this entity is that impacts literally everything about your life, like what this entity was saying and why, in a way that was important for that time.
I know we talked about it like that. Everything you do is really deeply rooted in your writing and reading. But I mean, is the upcoming book, some sort of a reaction to like spending quite a long time, many years, in doing digital content and really building it? As I said, going from 0 following to over 600,000 followers on various different social media platforms. I mean, what is it? Is this sort of like homecoming, going back where you started, or is it a sort of, okay, as you said, it comes sort of in various different segments? So my question is rather, what actually really drove you to do this big book? Shall we call it this way?
What drove me to do the book? Maybe it is going back. I've never been asked this question. I think that for me, the way that I learn is through books, and I love books. And so when it was offered to me to write one about something I love, the economy, and explaining it, I thought it made a lot of sense. I also think that it's tough though, because like people don't read books as much as they used to. They're on social media. And so it's kind of like, is this the right medium to express economics education? And when I asked myself that question, my content is across every single platform. So YouTube, newsletter, audio, podcast, short form video. And I think the book is just another expression of a medium. So if people learn best through reading, I want them to have access to a book. If they learn best through YouTube videos, I would want them to have access to YouTube videos. And so I think it's just another way to get across information to those who need it.
So it wasn't really like filling some sort of a yearning for, as you was a little kid, you were writing books,
and that's what you. Yeah,
of course. Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, but like the book's not about me. The book is not. Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, of course, like, yes, it's so exciting. And if little Kyla could see me now, she'd probably be like, "What happened?" Like, I thought we were going to be stuck in Kentucky forever. And so there's something like, of course, when you do such a big project like this that takes up so much time, there is an element of it gets so personal. And the book comes out in 5 days, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is it going to go okay? Like, are people going to like it? And all of those thoughts. And it's hard to remove that from interpretation of self. But the book exists for people, right? Like it is a project of mine that was so many, 26 years in the making, but it's also meant for those who read it.
About reading, do you read paper books, or do you read on Kindle? Do you read ebooks, or do you read everything online? What? I mean, I see a lot of books on the on the shelf behind you.
Yeah. I wish you could see. That's half my book collection.
I can imagine. No, I think there's a connection. You should see my bookcase. It's
oh man. Yeah. No, I love reading books. I'm reading The Material World right now. It's right on, got stuff stacked on it. But like, yeah, I'm a big fan of like actual books.
Hmm.
This is really good. It's about raw materials. So I read everything. Like I just finished a book on cults, Scientology. I know that's like a weird
Cult, okay.
world. Yeah. Soul power, core power, soul cycle, CrossFit, like all of these various cults that might
Hmm.
exist or people are sort of tangentially a part of. So I finished that, and then I started a book on Glossier, which is a makeup company. Sort of how the founder founded. I read everything. I read a book on Domino's, the pizza company, last week.
Oh,
Um,
that's why you had so many great tweets on Domino's. That's where it comes from.
yeah,
Okay, here it
yeah,
is. I
yeah,
caught you. So you get your
yeah.
inspiration offline, big time.
I do. Oh yes. And I work on a lot of stories. So I probably write 3 or 4 stories a week. So I wrote a story on dominoes. And so for me, I go so deep into everything I work on. I'm working on a story about Nintendo. So I'm reading 3 books about Nintendo, listening to 2 of them and reading one
When
of
you say a
them.
story, you mean like a commentary for, let's say, if what do you mean? But what do you mean by a story?
Um, a story for Bloomberg
Oh,
Opinion or
okay,
for Wealth Simple, the podcast that I work for, or for my own channels.
okay.
Yeah. And so I just go super deep into the weeds. But yeah, I love books and I love fiction books too. So my laptop, which I'm looking into, is stacked on top of The Source of Self-Regard, which is not fiction, but by Toni Morrison, The Web of Meaning by Jeremy Lint, Jennifer Egan, A Visit from the Goon Squad, and then Crash Landing, which is a nonfiction book by Liz Hoffman.
Hmm. Well, how does one become a Bloomberg Opinion contributor? Did they call you, or did you call them? Did you apply, or how does it work?
I'm lucky enough that they reached out to me, and it's been really fun working with them because I don't have a journalism background, and I wouldn't even pretend to. Like the work that journalists, as you know, do is hard. And so I kind of like am journalism adjacent with them. I do an opinion video column. We just published one today, the 23rd of May, on finfluencers and these big accounts on Twitter that will give financial advice and how bad their takes are and like what that actually means for the society at large. So I do a lot of like society at large pieces for Bloomberg Opinion.
But is it mostly video, or do you also write, as you
It's
mentioned?
all video.
It's
It's
all
all
video.
video.
Well, Kyla, thank you. Thank you very much for taking your
Of
time.
course.
Good luck with your book. And
Thank you.
hopefully we'll talk later, and maybe we'll sort of come up with some statistics. I know your background is also in statistics and math and everything about like, measure the opportunity cost of the time you devoted to the book.
No, I don't think I can look at that. Yeah, it was the past year of my life, which is fine. That's what you're meant to do when you write a book. But my dear friends are very happy that the book is going to be out into the world, so I'll be quiet about it. Yeah.
So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.